everybody. Welcome to our latest edition of 12 for 12 for LMEA. We have an outstanding panel here today. We're going to talk all things percussion, marching band, concert band, you name it, we're going to discuss it. Ready, set, not go yet. Some of us might not be comfortable in the setting of percussion and the language that is associated with it. So we're going to say ready, set, wait, and we need help, right? And these guys are going to help us navigate this percussion, the street that we're going to roll down. So once again, welcome. We're happy that you're here. We're happy that you're watching on replay. I want these guys to introduce themselves first before we get into some of our questions and topics for today. Joe, I have you first. We'll go around the horn. Can you introduce yourself first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Moore. I'm the assistant professor of percussion at the University of Louisiana, Monroe. Just recently started this year, so happy to be back in Louisiana and happy to be on this call with my colleagues.
Thank you, Joe. There's a certain Louisiana flavor that we have here. Brian, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Nozny. I'm assistant professor of percussion at McNeese State University. This is my third year here in the great state of Louisiana, and yeah, really happy to be here.
Awesome. Brett Landry, no relation to Brett Babineau.
No relation, no. Hi, I'm Brett Landry. I am the assistant director of bands and percussion here at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. This is my 5th year here, but I did teach high school band here in Louisiana at New Iberia Senior High from 2005 to 2010. And I've lived here nearly all my life, except for a brief hiatus when I went to graduate school. So it's wonderful to be back. It's wonderful to be here talking about percussion, and hopefully we can help answer some key questions that you guys might have about what we do and how we can help you do things a little better.
Absolutely. Gustavo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gustavo Miranda. I teach percussion here at Nicholls State University. I've been here for the past 4 years, but I've been in Louisiana since 2011. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues.
All right. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you guys for being here again. Being that we're in the midst of marching band now, we're recording this in late October. We're about to cross into the final aspects of what our high schools are doing and our colleges are doing with this beast called marching band, right? So if we could grab some topics and questions from that genre, then we'll move to other topics. I think that could be a great setup for us. As groups are beginning to follow the BOA DCI pattern, even in small bands, there's a lot of questions and a lot of opportunity that they're finding that if I mic my front ensemble, I can get a little bit more balance and clarity with that. However, some of you have realized that a lot of our directors maybe are not doing that to maximize the sound that they want to get up in the football stands, right, into the stadium. So does somebody want to kind of talk about first about proper mic placing in front ensemble and the mics that maybe they should be using? It's kind of this. What systems should they be using to get the maximum effect?
I guess I'll jump on that one first. In terms of microphones, probably the kind of on the go-to standard ones now is the Audio-Technica 2020 or the 2035. Almost like very similar, identical mics. The 2035 has a couple extra added features, but it's also like $50 extra. So the 2020 is really a lot of the go-to. Honestly, what it seems to me tends to be the biggest problem is that they don't spend enough. Band directors, because they have so many things going on, they don't spend enough time experimenting and actually getting the proper placement of the microphone. They just kind of throw it in there and go, "Yep, we're all right. Hit the marimba, Sally. Okay, and okay, we hear it through the speakers. Good, we're good." And they just kind of accept it because they've got to get on to so many other things. So I think that dedicating a little bit of time to actually have someone on the board, someone on the mixing board, someone on the keyboard, someone there that can like kind of tech and move things around, and then someone up in the stands to move things around is really going to benefit in a lot of ways. Typically, what you're going to want to do is mounting underneath the board. Depending on the type of keyboard you have, if you have a field frame, there's usually a bar underneath that you can mount the microphone from. Probably in the realm of 9 to 11 inches or so from the bars below is where you're going to want to go. And then probably the biggest thing that has one of the things that has the most impact is using a shock mounted mic clip as opposed to a more traditional mic clip, just because every single time that they hit that board, you're getting the vibrations from the frame in the actual signal if you're using a more traditional microphone clip. So having a shock mount clip is going to really help theirs. I'm trying to think of anything else. And then finally, the last thing I'd probably say on that, and there's lots of different ways that you can use one microphone. If you're miking a marimba and you're using the entire board, you'll probably want to use 2 microphones and then pan it accordingly. But then from there, the only other thing I would say is don't be afraid of using your EQ as well. If you're starting to hear a lot of low rumble, something like that, well, literally just EQing that out all of a sudden can really help to clean up the sound a lot.
Is there anything that we should not be miking in the front ensemble? I
mean,
think of what some of the larger groups will have. They'll actually have a snare drum, bass drum, right? The concert bass, sometimes a full set of timpani, like you mentioned, multi-octave marimbas and xylophones.
I think it just depends on what you're doing. If you have the resources to mic everything so that you can then affect that signal and mix it appropriately, then by all means go right ahead. But what I would say is that if you are looking at it in terms of just enforcing some of that sound, just ask yourself, okay, well, what's the thing that's not cutting through? Do you really need to mic your glockenspiel? Probably not. That's probably going to cut enough and you're going to get enough of that color up there. But maybe low end of the marimba, or high end of the vibraphone, that might not be cutting at all. So it really just becomes a question of what resources do you have, and then where are the things that really need it the most? I think that would probably be the best place to start. You probably don't need to mic your concert bass drum.
Yeah.
That might not be a thing that you need unless somehow it's not getting up to the box. But at that point, there's probably a tuning issue or something like that.
Well, and I'm gonna jump onto what Brian's saying there, because there's a couple of important things. I don't have as much knowledge about the actual hardware, but some of the things that I've been hearing over the last month or so, as people have been getting back into playing festivals and things like that, there's a couple of things to consider. If you're actively mixing during your show, then miking a lot of other things is fine, because you can adjust. Because obviously, if somebody's playing a really loud cymbal crash right near a microphone, you're going to peak that microphone instantly. And then from that point forward, anything you're playing after that is going to have some level of distortion. It's going to take a second reset. So if you're actively mixing and can dial those points back, or if you've got multiple microphones and you can, essentially zoom into, like, for example, if you have an accessory setup with maybe some Latin percussion, a couple of blocks, maybe like a cabasa or a shakere that aren't going to be super duper loud, you want people to hear that, then you can adjust on the fly. You can sort of like 3D mix and move around the ensemble. But if you're like a lot of other high school groups where you've got a couple of keyboards and then maybe a little bit of an accessory area, and you're prioritizing something, prioritizing those mallet instruments with microphones is, to me, the best way to go, because you can always hit a cymbal and get a big loud sound, whether it's a short sound or a long sound. Same thing with bass drum. I think Brian was absolutely right. If you're playing concert bass drum and it's not getting up to the box, there's probably something else going on there with that bass drum that needs to be fixed first, not adding a microphone to it. But I don't know if I would mic a cymbal. I think it's great to mic a snare drum, or maybe I saw a group this weekend that had a drum set, but they were only miking the kick drum. And it made sense, because what they wanted to hear was that punch. And they wouldn't have been able to hear that punch if they had taken that microphone and moved it, say, to the marimba. And they asked me afterwards, should I have put that microphone on the marimba? And so, well, it depends on what you want. If you want to hear that punch so you can get that through to the audience, or if you want, if you got speakers on the side, you want the ensemble to feel that sound, then yeah, do that. But if you really want to hear that ostinato marimba pattern over and over again, then sure, mic that marimba up, I think the last thing I want to say about it is, even if you are miking, one of the most important things is it's very crucial not to just play to the microphones. It's important that students are still playing to the audience. Too often, it's just this light little touch and we can't really hear the inflection. The microphones simply augment the sound that you're making on the instrument. So if you've got poor mallet choices, or if you're not playing with good velocity in your stroke, you're not making a full sound, those microphones aren't picking up anything except for the sound that is just barely there. So for me, it's about teaching the proper technique first, teaching them how to play to the box. I mean, we all grew up in ensembles that didn't have microphones. We were just playing. big, huge mallet heads playing as hard as we could. And when people could hear us, it was like, yeah, now everyone can hear everything. So play to the audience, don't just play to the microphones. And it's going to come out sounding, I think, the way that you hear it in your head when you're sitting in the audience listening to it.
Brett, that's a great point, man, because Gustavo, I'll turn it over to you if I can interject here. Back in the day, right, there were no miking at all. So have we, as directors, stop thinking about acoustics? You mentioned the word velocity, musicianship, and digging into the proper stick and mallet choices, which we'll get into later, to make sure the students are learning those aspects rather than almost a cheat system. Something to think about, right?
Yeah, I don't think we've left it behind. I think we've diverged. Electronics give us things that we didn't necessarily know we needed before. Like the ability to hear a line in the marimba that is being played in the clarinets or the saxophones, just to help change the color of that sound. But I think in a lot of places, and I'm hearing it all over the state even now as I travel, proper fundamentals are still being taught. It's just we have to make a decision to not just use the microphones to make us louder. It's asking yourself, what are you making louder? That's, to me, the most important thing.
That's great, man. Gustavo, please.
I was just going to add that a lot of times we're so concerned with the technical stuff. It can be so intimidating for a band director that went to school for music education for 5 years, 4 years, whatever your degree is. And you never talk about microphone or anything like that. And then you get in the job and you have to deal with that stuff. And, that we get so worried about that stuff that we forget that we have this right here, ears. We can listen to stuff and trust your ears, trust your instincts. Go out there, listen to what you want to hear. Why you want to hear more of this. Don't listen to with your eyes. A lot of times I see band directors, when I'm trying to help, looking down and seeing the kid on the bass drum moving, really doing large movements and stuff. And then the band director is maybe not as much bass drum, but in reality, you can't hear the bass drum as much. So there's all this technical stuff. Sometimes you have the right microphone, but you don't have the right speakers or the right mixer. But at the end of the day, 90% of the time, you're able to get the sound you want if you just listen and you try to work with what you have. So a lot of times we just forget to do that. It's just as simple as listening and trying to figure out what you want to listen more or less. So
that's great, man.
Yeah, and then just to add on top of that, I think Brian also mentioned this earlier, having someone up in the audience listening to help with the balance of things. I think that's also a great add-on to that, making sure you have somebody there to really check the balance of everything that you're doing. And then just some things I've seen this year too is just the placement of speakers, also making sure that those that your subs and your other speakers are placed properly and facing toward the audience. I've seen some where both speakers were faced sort of at an angle away from where you were trying to get that sound to go to. So having somebody up to check for balance, but then also having people on the different instruments that you're trying to balance in the ensemble, making sure that the speakers are placed in the right directions and those things to get that sound up to your audience, to your judges, so they can hear what you're trying to play for them.
All right, great. Hey, moving on. Well, not moving on, but moving on to the next question or topic, was kind of sticking with marching percussion. I kind of heard through the years that might be somewhat of a formula for if I have these amount of battery percussion students, I'm going to use, here's the instrumentation I'm going to use from snare to quad to bass drum. Can you guys address that? And Joe, we can maybe start with you since we ended, and we'll start with you. Is there something that a formula you found that works from small instrumentation, small group of players to large group of players?
Well, I think for me, it really depends on the type of music that you're playing in your show. I think that's an important way to kind of look at it. So if you're playing mostly a blues or a jazz show, you might want to imitate more of a drum set type of a group. So for instance, if I've only got 4 players and my show is a blues show or a jazz show, I might have a bass drummer, I might have a snare drummer, I might have a cymbal player to kind of emulate that drum set sort of a thing in the marching percussion. If that's all, if I've only got a few people to do that. And then the other thing, at least for me, when I'm looking at smaller groups, I'm wanting to, I'm usually wanting to kind of have a balance of bass drums to snare drums to tenors or quads and whatnot. So balancing that sound out. If I've only got enough to have 3 bass drummers, then 3 bass drummers would be a good minimum to try to keep. And then from there, at least a couple snare drummers, and for every 2 snare drummers, 1 quad player. So that would be something I would look at in my ensemble. So that's a little bit more than what we're talking about, but you can kind of balance it down from there, from that point.
So for every 2 snares, a quad.
Yes.
So if I have 5 players to deal with, then what's a formula that we would want to use in a traditional style?
So if you got 5 players, for me, I may, at that point, I may not even have a quad player. I may just have 2 snare drummers and 3 bass drummers in that sort of a setting. But then, you know, if you, because I think for me personally, two bass drummers is too little. If I'm going to have a bass line, I would want to at least have 3, just so you're getting you're able to split more things or have more tonal sounds there. But if I'm down to 2, you might as well just have 1 at that point and then move from there. But so for me, 3 bass drummers minimum, and then if I can only have 1 snare drum and 1 quad, that's fine. Or I might just go 2 snares and 3 basses.
For the audience who's listening out there, I hope you're writing this on sticky notes and you're putting it permanently, this information, on whiteboards in your office, so you can constantly look at this come June, July, August of year. This is priceless information. Anybody? I see Brett, you're off mute. Do you want to chime in on that one?
I do have a couple things. I think Joe's absolutely right, especially with the bass drum stuff. You know, the idea of a bass line and the ability to have some type of a bass melody. You don't really get that with just 2 bass drummers. And I love when you ask the question about what would you do with 5 people, we were all basically thinking the same thing. Like, well, we'd have 2 snares and 3 bass drummers. And I know that like I'm hearing a band director go, well, how do you know that that's what you do? I think part of it is also the players, right? So I have a friend who teaches here in the state who came to me during the summer and said, I have this number of players. What do I do? And I said, well, do you have a tenor drummer? And he said, I don't think I do. I said, okay, well then don't have a tenor drum. You know, there's other ways that we can do this. I remember, I'm going to throw a shout out to Craig Miet here, and I'm sure he'll love that. But years ago, they actually had a NASCAR show where they put their front ensemble on the field, and they moved elements of their battery percussion into the front ensemble. And at one point, the marching band actually went through the front ensemble, like the cars going through the pit, and it was just really excellent staging. But it was also, you know, some of it was by necessity. They needed certain things. I've also seen other groups, even local around here to Lafayette, who they've only got 4 or 5 percussionists. So they've decided, you know what, we're going to make a front ensemble out of this. It'll be a percussion ensemble. We'll put them somewhere, either on the field or maybe on the front sideline. Maybe they'll use some, you know, marching percussion at some point. Maybe they won't use marching percussion at all, and create just a percussion sound space that works for, like Joe said, the show design that you're using. You know,
concert band on the marching field,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. You know, we played timpani in front ensemble for years. I mean, there's no reason we can't. There's no rule that says you can't do that. I think it's just that sometimes it's a little more complicated. It requires a little bit more information. For example, if you're using a separate music writer and you want to do something different, it would require you to maybe dig in a little bit more to what it is that you're playing to know, hey, is this going to work for me? But yeah, I agree with the formula. You know, I love 3 to 4 bass drums. I think if you can have 4 bass drums, that's wonderful. And in some ways, a great high school line could be, you know, maybe 2 snares, 1 tenor, 3 or 4 basses, or even 3 snares, 2 tenors, 3 or 4 basses. It gives enough of a voicing. So you have a little soprano, you have a little alto tenor, you have a little bass, and it's probably pretty clear which voicings are being represented in that. And it also allows you to do things musically with your drum line that the band will be able to respond to. So there needs to be voices there. It doesn't have to always be just snare, tenor, bass. Sometimes it can be, shoot, years ago at Lafayette High, we did one movement snare, and then 2 movements later, the snares put their instruments down and picked up tenors, and there were no snares on the field. So there's ways to work around it. You just have to go with what you have, what you're doing, and what your players can handle.
Gustavo, Brian, any additions to this?
I do, but Gustavo unmuted first, so do you want to take it first?
No, I was just gonna say, like, one thing I think naturally we think about, like, the marching, like when you think about marching, percussion, drumline, percussion in general, more and more we're starting to be more open-minded with what that needs to be, you know, like where the direction we're going with it. Like if you think about, you know, especially if you the schools we have around here, they think about like snare drum, you have to play traditional grip, and it's like, no, you don't. And now they're watching, you know, like big DCI groups playing with, like, you know, with a matching grip, and it's like, okay, do I really need to teach this kid that can barely hold the right stick the right way, how to hold this left hand stick in a different manner, you know, and do all this stuff. And it's whatever comes naturally, like what Joe was saying, like, you know, I would have snare drum and bass drum. For me, what I think about is what's one of the most popular sounds we hear, like in terms of drums, it's a drum set, right? We listen to pop music a whole lot, whether you want it or not. That's in our background. And if you think about drum set, what drum set is, if you're playing a gig, drum set is bass drum, snare drum, and hi-hat. That's it. Equivalent to in a drum line, that would be our bass drum or snare drum and your cymbals, right? So if you don't have the toms are kind of like or tenor drums or the drums that have like all the fancy stuff going on. If you don't have enough students, I feel like that's kind of like how naturally everything happens to us. It's just all about like the way you want to hear things and what you you know. But sometimes it goes to what Brett was saying too. Sometimes it goes with what you have, you know, the students you can work with. If you get a student from you teaching them high school and you get a student from middle school that says, I can only play tenor drums, you know, I'm a big believer that you should teach them everything. But if that's what you want to work with, then you can adjust around. But yeah, I think it's a very natural process. Like we're finally opening our minds to things that we should be doing a long time ago, right? Like in terms of like what does it sound better? Like the concert percussion and the marching field is more than natural. Like it sounds very good, and it's a good idea. We should do more often. Anyway, that was my input.
Right, and just to, sorry, Brian. Yeah, just to kind of follow up with that, and I was thinking mostly like if we're very strong on marching those players for that drum set sort of example. But if, you know, like Brett was saying too, if it comes down to it, putting the front ensemble just on the field or creating a front ensemble on the field, that is perfectly fine, and that actually works really well. I've seen a lot of groups do that. So yeah.
And I agree for the most part. I maybe it's because I was a tenor player that the thought of cutting the tenors hurts a little bit, but actually it hurts more my ears, because for me, then you basically cut the entire mid-range of the battery down. So you have soprano and you have bass and you have no middle ground, which grates on my ears. But the reality is, you're absolutely right. If you don't have the players, you don't have the players. However, I think one thing that we need to realize as well is it also depends on the content of the show. If you're doing like a Latin, like an Afro-Cuban based show, and you don't have tenors to give those timbale fills, that is going to be that's going to really hurt you. So I think that it comes, there's a lot of factors involved in here. And I do agree, 3 is kind of your minimum bass drum. And then, yeah, the 2-to-1 is the classic for snare to tenor. Absolutely. But if you're doing an Afro-Cuban show, is it worth doing just two snares and 3 bass drums? Or is it actually worth saying, we're just going to do 1 snare, 1 tenor, because that tenor might also be doing shell of the timbale stuff and all sorts of things like that. So it depends a lot of times. And I am a firm advocate. I agree completely with what they're saying, that, hey, do we need to even march a battery? If we have that few students and we have other people in the front ensemble or something like that, like, why not just, put them in the front ensemble? I've seen plenty of ensembles that have done that and they sound amazing. So I don't, maybe there's a stigma somewhere that some people think, but to me, if it's good sounds in time musically, I don't care if you have a battery or not. If it sounds good and it's supporting what's happening with the entire show, I don't care that I don't see snare, tenor, bass out there. That's fine.
I think the only stigma is that we kind of put ourselves in a box, and we're the most creative people in the world, right? So we tend to not be so creative because we are fearful of what's outside the box and to try new things. And all of your answers are wonderful. So there is a formula, and there's that however comma, right? Be creative. Use what you have. Use what genre you're playing, and use the instrumentation that you have. Use the instruments that you have, and call your local percussion professor, right, to give you the best answers possible for what you need. Moving on to probably the last marching band topic, Gustavo, I'll start with you here, or maybe Brett can answer this. I know, Brett, you mentioned in your intro that you have some high school experience down here in the Lafayette area. One question that came through was, what are some basic percussion elements that small schools can add to score better?
Yeah, Gustavo, you go first. I've talked.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely.
I'll focus on Brad starting.
What are some basic percussion elements, I guess tools or tricks or hints or that small schools can add to score better on their percussion sheets in marching band?
I feel like diversity is a big thing that we don't do much. Like a lot of the students I get here in Nichols are like, they have, when they get here, they say like, oh, I played snare drum only, or I play bass drum only. And they don't get to experience what it's like to play in the other sections and understand why a certain issue is happening with another section of their drum line. So I feel like that's a major issue we have. Like early on, we do what's the easiest for as educators. Like we already know this kid is going to do well. I don't have to work as hard, but it may seem like a shortcut, but it's not. It's really not. It's really important as a percussionist to understand like sound production in different instruments and technique in different instruments, and some tendencies that certain instruments has. And when you have a certain student that only played tenor the whole middle school and high school time that they play in band, that's something that can hurt your ensemble very much. So one thing I like to do when I'm teaching any summer camps or anything like that, I always like to mess around with the students and get them to play instruments they never play. And it's insane how like students will look at you like you're this crazy person, like, what? Wait, I never played bass drum before. And it's my I always say the same thing. I don't care. Go over there, go try to do this. You have to experience this. And at the end of the day, they end up like having a good experience, having a good time. Even if they didn't do great, whatever, they're understanding what some of the issues with that instrument may be, and just making them a little more diverse, like the whole idea of like early on, if the student is not very talented, and this is something we have even like with most of us teach percussion methods class, and we have to talk about this with people from other instruments that are learning from us to teach in the future. And one of the things, the book, one of the most popular books, the Gary Cook book that we use to teach that class, talks about is how the old mentality, it seems something like very far away, like that doesn't happen anymore, but it still does, of like band directors will look at their kids and like, okay, this kid doesn't seem very talented for music, let's put them in the drums, let's put them in percussion. And that's something that can really hurt as well. If you keep doing that, if you keep getting your students that are not very talented, and your first assessment of like what their music school can skills can be, and then you put them in drums because they're not as skillful as the other kids. Oh, I need this kid in the flute because I really need good musicians in the flute section. Then that's what you're going to get. If you don't put good musicians to play in the percussion section, that's exactly what you're going to get. You're not going to get good musicians in the percussion section in general, like whether it's your drum line or your front ensemble. So that's something that from the get-go, it can help you a lot. Get some of those like extremely talented, smart students in the front ensemble and the drum line. Get them to try different things. If they say, I only played snare drum, get them to play, even if it's just for a few rehearsals, to play different instruments. And I feel like that can help a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, Joe, go.
The thing I would say to sort of go with this question, to add to the score, what are some things that you could possibly do? For me, it's always about smaller schools specifically. It's always about doing the things that you have in your show well and properly. So if you're a smaller school and you've got a front ensemble that has accessory percussion instruments, okay, so making sure that there is a triangle clip and not a piece of string holding the triangle. I think that's important. So making sure you have a triangle clip there and make sure the student is striking it in the right area to get the right sound that matches with and blends well with what your ensemble is playing. That kind of thing. Tambourine, all the accessory instruments, making sure they're being properly played and performed. I think that helps add to the score without having to actually add anything new. Just making sure that, okay, all of these instruments that we're playing in our front ensemble are being done with proper technique, and are being, and the sounds that we're making are enhancing the music that the rest of the ensemble is playing.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, my first band in New Iberia was 28 people. I think it had 5 or 6 percussionists. And I fought because I was, you know, very, very young. I fought with this idea of I'm surrounded by these bigger bands, and it can be difficult sometimes when you don't have the kind of forces that other bands have to do the things that you hear in your head. And I think that both Joe and Gustavo are absolutely correct. The idea of diversity, the idea of doing these little things right, like having these voicings in your percussion section is awesome. I can remember thinking about what I needed and really going back to being a concert percussionist and saying, okay, so if I'm inside and I'm playing a piece of music with my concert band, I might have a mallet percussionist or 2 that might be covering some of the wind lines. So like flute and clarinets covered in maybe bells or vibraphone or marimba or xylophone. Oh, and is there a way that I can mount those instruments so that I might be able to put like a set of bells on top of the xylophone, so maybe one person can play both of those if I'm short for people. And then thinking about, what about battery percussion? You know, we always have bass drum, we always have snare drum. I'm going to include tenors because I don't want Brian to feel left out. And yes, there we go. And knowing that, okay, well, if I don't have enough people to cover everything, what do I absolutely need? So I'll put a couple of bass drums out there, maybe a snare drummer, a tenor drummer. If I don't have that voicing, maybe I'll put it in the front ensemble. I'm not going to try to add anything massive. I'm not going to put timpani out on the field because I don't think timpani is going to help my ensemble sound any better unless I'm doing a timpani concerto as my marching show. Or I may not put a lot of accessory percussion out on the field unless I have a person who can, you know, play this wood block here and then move to a ribbon crasher here, or, you know, play this spiral cymbal here, or, you know, those kind of things. If I don't have a person to cover that voicing, I'm not going to try to make it more difficult than it needs to be. And I think that's the most important thing that the first year and a half taught me is, if my group can't play a complicated snare part, I think the most important word in the question is scores, how to get scores up. If my group can't play a complicated snare part, I'm not going to write a complicated snare part. You know, if paradiddles are all they can play and play well, then I'm going to maximize those paradiddles. I'm going to make them sound amazing, and I'm going to put them in places that show them off. Because, hey, isn't that what we're here to do? Like, you know, we want them to perform to the very best of their ability. I'm not going to put things that they can't play. I'm not going to use hybrid rudiments. I'm not going to, you know, spend all this time on flam drags and things that are maybe ahead of where they are right now. But I'm going to plan for the next couple of years while I'm doing that. So I make my book strong. I make it orchestrated well so that it balances what I'm hearing in the winds. And I add a diverse amount of percussion, kind of coming back on what it is to be a percussionist inside with a concert band, to help bolster the colors of percussion from the front all the way to the back. That's really, to me, the easiest way to start that process. And as a judge, that's another thing that I'm looking for. So if I see, you know, the shoestring triangle thing, that's an epidemic. I mean, it's everywhere. If I see a shoestring triangle, the first thing I think is, well, we didn't get far enough in this. We didn't get to the point where we were talking about all these instruments. Now it's just something, we pick it up and we play it. But what does it mean? What's its purpose? Same thing with tambourine technique. There's a million ways to hit a tambourine, and, you know, probably 250,000 of them are not quite right. So how do we get to the ones that are right? We need to be talking about these things. So, I mean, it's all lumped together, but sometimes I want to say, don't worry about scores and just play percussion, you know, because there's a lot of good stuff out there.
You mentioned the difficulty level of some of these. If you can't play it, don't play it. Well, I think some directors, because of lack of resources, they buy the stock charts, right?
Sure.
And they feel that this is the only thing I can do is play what's written. And we're fighting every day to try to get these percussion students to play things that they aren't ready for. So simplifying the parts, you're thinking acceptable. Finding free resources of a buddy or a university professor who could volunteer pro bono to make some suggestions, right? Could be an avenue that they would take.
And I'd be happy to you know, help if anyone ever asks, like, hey, can you help with this? I mean, obviously you want to make sure it's challenging. You have standards you want to meet, not just for your group, but also for, you know, individuals as musicians. But there's ways that you can take stuff out and put stuff in that that'll get you there without having to make the month of September feel like you are literally moving through mud, because sometimes it can feel that way.
Yeah.
Gustav, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
So I just wanted to say something because I was literally judging a competition yesterday, and the things that Joe hit it dead on. Do the things that you're doing well. So when I see that a person is, you know, they're playing the triangle, but they're playing it improperly, you know, that someone's playing a bass drum, but they're obviously, the student doesn't care about the sound. There's like, take stick, hit drum, cool, I win. It's like, no, there's a proper way to get a good tone. If I see that, I don't care how big or small your program is. If they're doing it properly, like, I'm going to give you points. So making sure that they're doing all the things really well from a tone standpoint, from a rhythmic standpoint, like, those are huge. The other two things that I notice are, one, dynamic range is practically non-existent. Their dynamic range is about this big. Okay. And, you know, maybe some of it comes from their used to just playing in concert band or something like that, where they feel, well, I'm inside. And so they need to realize that they need to expand that even further when they're outside and they don't have a hall or a room or walls to help with that sound a little bit. So they need to be even larger in their dynamic range. Really expressive in their phrasing and stuff is one that always gets to me. And then the last one I'd say is, especially with front ensemble, with how many colors are there, it drives me batty when I see a front ensemble book that's literally just the wind parts. That someone has just gone and go, okay, well, I'll take the flute part and I'll put it in the xylophone, and I'm going to take the trumpet part and I'm going to put it in the marimbas, and I'm going to take okay, now there's this long line and I'm just going to put it in the vibraphone because we got sustain there and whatever. And it's like, now there's moments when that's necessary and that's important and we should do that. Absolutely. But when that's 95% of the show, why do we even bother having a front ensemble? Because now we're not able to contribute our own actual colors that are unique to us there. So I would say that directors, when they see those things, hey, take an extra 5 minutes, and instead of just giving them those chords, hey, maybe make it like kind of an Alberti bass, break that up, do something along those lines or something, so that now there's actually something that the marimba can contribute that maybe the low brass that are also playing that chord, they can't actually do that. That's another one that those three things are the biggest things that I tend to key in percussion when I'm judging.
Before we move on to the next question or topic, those with, again, listening on replay right now, think of all the things that they're telling you, but yet as directors, I'm probably guilty of it as well, we don't listen to our percussion tapes, right? So they're talking about about things like enhancing what the band is doing, playing your percussion instruments properly. They are giving you tips to score better, to be a better percussion teacher, regardless of what your instrument background is. Listen to your percussion tapes. They're giving you great advice, not just, yeah, you hit the drum on count one, right, Brian? Okay. Gustavo, man, you mentioned something really special, and that was diversify yourself as a percussionist to learn as many instruments as possible. And that's great, because that's a great segue to this next question is, how do I get my students to be more interested in playing mallet instruments, which I think students want to be diverse. I think directors are trying to do the best job of giving them opportunities to play accessory percussion along with snare and bass and timpani, but not sure about that mallet choice, right? Joe, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. So for me, I think it's about getting the students who aren't used to playing those mallet instruments exposed to them in some way. Whether that's really, I'd probably start with just improvisation, having the students get together and maybe give them some things that they can play, a couple notes that they can play together, and then have them improvise on a scale or something like that, just to kind of get them used to being at that instrument or being behind the instrument. And then from there, I think we talked about this earlier, or maybe we talked about it before we actually started the call, but was bringing some people in, getting some guest artists to come in, whether it's your percussion specialist at the university that's close to you or something like that, get them to come in. Maybe they'll do a concert for you, or if they want to bring their percussion ensemble out to your school to perform for your students, allow them to do that, set something up so your students can see what it's like to be a percussionist. Percussionist plural. So we're so used to, and I was guilty of this when I was in high school and middle school, is just I played snare drum. That's what I did. Like, I didn't want to do anything else. And then I saw someone play four mallets, and then I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then as I started to get into that when I got into college, that became the thing I wanted to do a lot. So it's just about getting the students exposed to those things, and allowing them to explore them in a way that's non-judgmental. And I think improvisation is a good way to do that.
Hey, Gustavo, since you brought it up, you want to take some of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, the importance of like that figure, like that, the educator that like is that we look up so much as a student, it's so important. Like as a teacher, if you're not showing them that you think that's an important part of the music, they're going to look at it that way. If you think it, if they don't see it as if you care about what they're doing, they're not going to care to do it well. And like it goes back to the triangle clip thing. Like if you don't go as serious as like getting an actual professional triangle clip for your triangle, your students are gonna read into that. What they're reading is like, what I do is not as important as the flutist that's doing this and has all the resources they need. And I came from a teacher. I'm actually from Brazil, and like this I had this teacher who had like this very different culture, but it was interesting. She never allowed us to use the word hitting the instrument. And here's the thing that's so natural, like, oh, hit that drum. Like I had a teacher here. I never misinterpret what he said, but she wouldn't go as far like, let us say the word hitting. Like you hit something, like you hit a rock, you hit another person when you're fighting. An instrument you play. You wouldn't say like hit that string. You say play that string, play that instrument. You're talking about an instrument, a musical instrument. You with the word to use is play or perform, not hit, right? Hit is something very and this was a teacher that taught me a lot. And from the beginning, she never gave us the option of like to think that I could be just one thing or the other. Like, like she would do things like, okay, your 9-stroke rolls are amazing, but how about your major scales? You can't even play your major scales. So, from the beginning, to get the student to understand that as a percussionist, you need to play all these different instruments, and all these different things are part of what you're supposed to do. I think it's important. Like if you're as a band director, you establish that early on and you show them how important it is what they're doing. That triangle, it wasn't, I tell this to my students all the time. It wasn't until I was sitting in a master class, an hour-long master class for triangle only, that I understood what I was doing as a percussionist. Okay, I sat down and I heard somebody that played in a professional orchestra talking about a triangle for an hour long. And in the beginning, for me as a percussionist, it was a joke, but halfway through, I'm like, that's amazing. Like there's many different sounds that I can get from one triangle. Like having different triangles actually make a difference. And that's when you get the students to start caring about what they're doing, and to being more interested on diversify. Like that's when the student actually, like what Dr. Moore mentioned, like he plays snare drum, and then he went into college or whatever, he started looking at people playing keyboard instruments, and oh wow, I gotta try this stuff. And then from there, he's like, oh, I gotta play. I know his story. I know a little bit about Joe Moore, but like then he started playing the word percussion stuff and drum set and all of that. And that happened to a lot of us. But if you have that educator early in your career that is telling you that that's important, that sound production is important. Playing the triangles is just as important as playing the snare drum. Then they start to get it, you know, like you won't get those students that work really hard in the marching season. And then when you get to the concert season, they're like sitting in the back, bored with their phones and not doing as well as they should be doing, you know?
I 100% agree with what Gustavo just said, because it actually reminded me of one of my fondest memories of being percussionist. You know, middle school as a percussionist can sometimes be a pretty crazy place. And I had a really excellent middle school band director who said, you know what, I'm going to talk to somebody who actually knows percussion. And he brought in a percussion instructor. And once a week for about an hour, we would learn a piece of percussion ensemble music. And as a middle school kid in the early 90s, this was literally the dream, because you realize there's this whole world of music that no one else gets to do, that we get to do. And it's got all kinds of different instruments, from mallet percussion to drums to Latin percussion to world percussion. And suddenly this whole thing opens up for you. And with regards to mallet percussion, I was always hesitant because I never felt like I was a very good mallet player. But then we got into that room with these pieces of music, and I was handed a part for bells. And I had to learn that part to be a part of the ensemble. And suddenly it was just 4 or 5 of us. And I was like, I need to learn this as part of the group. I'm part of the song. And it became important to me. And it drove, it really, in a lot of ways, it drove me to continue to play percussion, because it opened my eyes to everything that you could possibly see. And it was the commitment that that director made to bring someone in to say, let's show them what they can do. The cool thing is you don't even have to bring anyone in to do that nowadays, because there's all kinds of music all over the world. Yeah. I mean, we have 2 composers on this panel right now who have written music for this exact thing, to bring a different sound to a younger audience, to encourage them to play music that they wouldn't normally see. So, you know, you hop on the internet and within 10 minutes, you can have a whole list of songs. And the great thing is you can also play music that they might know, that they might hear on a regular basis. You can play music that maybe is related to stuff you're doing in your marching band show. I heard a group play Scheherazade this weekend. You know, there were kids in the front ensemble who didn't even know what Scheherazade was, and they were playing it. And the amount of music, just as a percussionist, in that one piece of orchestral music alone is magnificent. It's magnificent. And you could teach so much just from that. There are whole college percussion professors who spend like an entire fall semester just teaching Scheherazade, that it's such a great opportunity to look into something like that. So I think Gustavo's absolutely right. It's the investment. And you just got to make that investment to go out and look for a few of these things and meet the kids where they are. I mean, even if it's something that they hear on the radio, that's a start. And it gets them interested, get them in that little chamber ensemble setting, and get them to see what percussion's really like, because that's what we love to do. I mean, we like to play by ourselves, but we would much rather play together as a group and just, you know, do something really great and communicate and collaborate. That's where it's fun.
You know, you mentioned a good point, Brett, is and Gustavo, with the percussionists sitting in the back, right? And band directors and orchestra directors are going to concentrate on the melody, the melodic parts from flutes, clarinets, and blending that together, and all the tick checks that we need to make, right? Is we leave percussion alone, start a percussion ensemble. That's a great tool, man. Or have a separate percussion rehearsal, separate from the wind players, to give them something of their own. Both of those things are really great ideas. Brian?
Well, what my teachers used to always say, that the reason percussion ensemble is so important is because it's the one moment where we actually get to play the melody. We are such a coloristic instrument that we're rarely ever the focus of things. And so percussion ensemble is so important to our curriculum because it finally allows us to do that. So do you say, okay, on your concert band program, fine, we're also going to include, I think that this would just be important. And I know that there's already not enough hours in the day. So band directors might look at me like, yeah, that's the ivory tower, dude. You don't get it. But could we incorporate some sort of chamber piece on every concert? Not just percussion ensemble. Could you do a woodwind quintet? Could you do a brass quintet or something like that on just once, you know, on each of your concert band concerts or something like that? But given what we're talking about, yeah, do you incorporate a percussion ensemble piece so that the percussionists get out there in front and understand that, like, hey, these are your moments to shine, and exposes them to those ideas of playing all of these different instruments and diversifying like that. I think the other thing that you can do as well is use the instruments that they want to play as the carrot in front of them, right? Hey, okay, Johnny, I know you really want to play snare drum, and that's fine, but you're not going to be able to play snare drum unless you're also learning your major scales at this point. I think we've finally crossed over the threshold where I know when I first started percussion, you got a pad, you got sticks, and that's what you did. And now it's, okay, we get a pad and you get sticks, but you also get a bell kit. And we'll leave our thoughts on what the bell kit is alone, but the reality is at least they have them, and at least now there is the expectation that you're not just going to be a drummer like I was really pretty much expected to be. No, you're going to learn your major scales, you're going to learn what arpeggios are, you're going to learn those things. So maybe it's a factor of motivating as well, saying, well, I know you want to do this and that's fine, but you have to do this as well. It's part of the job.
It's if I can add, like the importance of percussion ensemble. It's interesting because I work with the Louisiana Youth Orchestra in Baton Rouge for a few years, and it was always awesome to see like how much it almost feels bad because I'm kind of biased to say, but how much better the percussion section was than the rest of the ensemble because of the fact that we had that 1 hour a week that we had percussion ensemble. You know, like they didn't have as much to play in the orchestra because it's a youth orchestra. You can't play big pieces like Mahler, stuff that requires a lot of percussion instruments. So the smart thing David Torrance did was back in the day started a percussion ensemble. He hired a person to take care of percussion ensemble, and I had the opportunity to do that for a couple of years. And just to get the students that went in there with the mentality, I just want to play snare drum or just want to play this or that, to like wanting to experience different things because that's what they do in percussion ensemble. They play timpani, but they also play snare drum and cymbal and this and that. And so they want to get in there, they want to rotate, and they're more interested, they're more, they're more devoted to the ensemble because they have this other time that they're not just sitting there and counting 100 measures before they play that one triangle hit, and so when they go there to count 100 measures and play that one triangle hit, they're going to really think about the sound they want to produce with that one triangle. And it makes a huge difference because now they actually have some training outside of that. And it just changes the whole ensemble. Percussion ensemble is the way to go. And I think everybody should be doing it.
Wouldn't there be a growth, guys, right, with the instruments that I have in the band room already? Wouldn't there be a growth if I actually started a percussion ensemble, that I start to begin to have interest in non-traditional methods, African, Gustavo for being Brazil, Latin percussion, steel pan ensembles, right? We had Liam Teague on a recording a few months ago. My goodness, super talented, right? Probably the most famous steel band percussionist out there right now. Wouldn't that be something that would generate more interest if you just simply started a traditional percussion ensemble?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the reality is that traditional percussion ensemble, as you're calling it, still encapsulates, all of these things. You'll have a contemporary percussion ensemble piece that will play marimba and vibraphone and also djembe and also have steel pan in it and also have timbales in it. I mean, it's going to run the gamut of so many things. So it's the exposure to all of those things.
Yeah, and Joe and I know this, having spent time in South Carolina. There's a whole music curriculum in the middle schools based on steel band. They'll have 80 kids in a steel band at a middle school, and they'll have multiple steel bands, and they come in and they learn music theory on steel pan. And it's like, I remember walking into a class and just being absolutely dumbfounded. And I was a doctoral student who'd been playing and teaching music for years, and I couldn't believe that we weren't all doing this. Now, of course, it takes a little bit of capital to get it moving because it's not like those drums are just going to show up for free. But the interest was definitely there. I've never seen kids more excited about playing a B-flat concert scale. And here's a steel band, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's the coolest sound, right?
Yeah.
Better than a clarinet player trying to cross the break, man.
It's certainly more pleasing once you get started. It might be a little more pleasing than a regular day in middle school band. But I tell you what, it's anything to teach these fundamental concepts, anything to bring that interest. I mean, we're all fighting, especially now post-COVID. We're all fighting for kids to come and be in our groups, right? So
Yeah.
as percussionists and even as a band director part-time, for me, it's like, okay, well, what can I do to make this interesting? What can I do? I'll use, Gustavo used the word earlier, more diverse. This is a more diverse way of looking at music that, as Brian just said, it's not like you're not going to be doing other things too. You're going to be doing it all together. You got a drum set in the back of a steel band. You got a person literally playing on a brake drum from a car in the back of a steel band, almost like you're playing snare drum. I mean, it's there's whirros, there's all kinds of different things. I mean, there's a lot to teach in there. And I know it seems kind of daunting. Now we're introducing a whole new world of instrumentation, but trust me, your friendly local percussionist is just itching to teach your kids how to play steel pan because they want to be a part of it too. So yeah, we're here for you.
We'll grab, for the sake of time, we'll grab one more big topic, right? And then I think some of the other questions and topics, we could probably do a little bit more rapid fire intent just to keep that moving. And this really wasn't a question that anybody came out, but you guys were really interested in making this a topic of this conversation, is skill set needed to go from, say, elementary to middle to high school, and high school to college. Such a broad topic, but certainly something that we all need to think about with standards. If you're looking at the national standards, right, curriculum and instruction, what is the skill set that you guys believe should be carried from grade to grade? Who wants to start that monster of a topic? Brian, do you want to jump in on that one?
I'm regretting this already.
Well, let's just go middle school, which in a lot of areas would cover 5th or 6th grade to 8th grade. Getting that group moving to 9th grade.
So I would say really what you can cover there is some of the all right, I mean, it's such a wealth of things. I would say probably there, at least on mallets, knowing at least all of your band friendly keys, being able to, like, I'm not going to say know all your major and minor scales or anything, but like you can play your major scales and maybe the relative minors in all of the really band friendly keys, right? F, B flat, E flat, right? Do you know those? And then I would say, expanding on that, then once you're in high school, that's when you cover all the other ones, right? Mm-hmm. So on mallets, I would probably say that. Scales and arpeggios. I wouldn't worry about anything for mallet. I would just stick with 2 mallets for middle school going to high school. And anyone else jump in when you're like, no, Brian's wrong on this. Snare drum, I would say being able to play a good open roll and a concert roll, and then understanding at least some of the basic rudiments that we have, some of our more basic rolls, paradiddles, things of that nature. And then being able to make a good quality sound on the most common accessory instruments. So, can they crash cymbals properly? Can they pick up a tambourine and a triangle and play them properly? Timpani, I would say probably being able to tune probably a 4th and a 5th pretty regularly would be a good one as well, at least. And then the only other thing that I would really say is having them have a good sense of time. Can they actually play with a metronome, understand what pulse is, understand how pulse works, and be able to actually play in time? That's one that seems to just escape so many people. I'm probably missing some, or maybe I've said too much, but those are at least my thoughts.
Oh man, I think you're right on. And if you're choosing good band lit for your middle school ensemble, you're probably going to be touching on all of these things anyway. You're going to have to play some tambourine. You're going to have to play some flams on the snare drum. That's something that often doesn't get discussed. And you're going to have to do some things in band friendly keys. I mean, I was thinking something like 3 flats, 3 sharps. So basically where Brian was. And, even on timpani, I have seen students who don't know how to tune, but know how to make the correct sound on the drums, that once they get to high school, we can start talking about tuning and listening. Tuning isn't a deal breaker for me, but definitely the correct sound on the instrument across all instruments, like playing a bass drum. If I look in the back and someone is just swinging at the middle of the bass drum and there's no real thought for, what that sound is supposed to be, that's a concern for me moving forward, because you might be on an island now where a band director might not have time to help you. So those are things that I'd like to see them be able to do. Quintessential sounds, big deal, plus what Brian was saying.
Gustavo,
If I can jump in real quick.
Yeah, Brian.
Well, there's just something that just occurred to me with all of this is band directors, if you want to ensure that this is possible, make sure that you're the one that's doing part assignments. I think too many times, I at least remember when I was, a middle schooler and a high schooler, like the parts just kind of went out and we just kind of picked them ourselves. And so, of course, Joe Moore is just going to pick snare drum over and over again, right? I was there too. Like that's what we did. But the reality is, I think that if the band director pays attention to that and just takes a little bit of time, then they can understand that, okay, Joe, no problem. You can play snare drum on this one, but I'm making sure that you're on timpani for this one, and I'm making sure that you're on marimba for this one. And now all of a sudden, Joe Moore, all of a sudden, now he's actually responsible to make sure that he's got to play more than snare drum. So I think that paying attention to part assignments alone is going to be a drastic change into how diverse.
Forcing diversity.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add is, often, every time I had the opportunity to work with young percussionists, the thing I think it's the most important. Like if you think of foundations and all, it's all about sight reading. Because like if you think about a percussion instrument, it's so much easier to begin with a percussion instrument than any other instrument. It's so much easier to play by ear. And often you're going to have those students that are very talented, very good ears in terms of like, they just listen to what you have to play when you demonstrate it once and they memorize it, the movie, what is it, Drumline, that they just can play by ear. And that does happen a lot. Students that are just I had the chance to teach at the thing in Baton Rouge called Kids Orchestra. We worked with, I wasn't even middle schoolers, elementary school. And I had so many of those students that could just play stuff by ears. And then like when it was time to do like a little assessment with them and you put music in front of them and they can't play. And that happens a lot. I think some of the frustration band directors have is when they get as a high school band director, they get students that cannot read music at all. And it's so easy for you just to let that go because they can play by ear. And at the end of the day, they're playing what you want them to play. And then it comes to us to the college professors here to actually like teach them how to read music. So it's crazy how many students we have that can play actually like repertoire really well, and then you get to a lesson, you start understanding some of the flaws they have with fundamental stuff because no one ever told them or taught them how to do that stuff. Simple things like playing a bass drum. I tell my students all the time, like, okay, you can all do all these fancy things on the snare drum, but anyone ever taught you how to hold a bass drum beater and place yourself, behind the instrument properly and all that? No. And it's like, it's mind blowing for them when they start understanding how much of that stuff is just kind of, and so I think for middle school, it's very important that all that foundation, like the theory part of it, that your students are very confident how to read 16 notes, 8th notes, and play them. And sound production for me is two things: sound production and a very good grasp of what theory, sight reading, and drums. I think that's an important thing because since we can produce sound much easier, a flute can just guess what the fingering will be for a certain note, but drummers, we're just forgive my teacher, but hitting drums, right? We're just hitting a certain surface, so it's much easier. So we need to make sure the foundation is solid. Sorry, I went off forever.
No, that's great, man.
Really quick to add to that, not a whole lot here, but just adding to the foundational stuff and everything that everybody else said is just developing a counting system at that age, a counting system that helps them with those foundational things of reading rhythm, the theory side of things like that. And really a lot of the times once they get past that middle school level, they tend to let go of the counting system, which then puts them back as far as the reading goes in the high school level and so forth and so on. So we want to really develop a strong counting system at that level as well.
That's good. And that could be anything kotai, right?
Right.
Doesn't have to be traditional.
Right. Syllables, 1 E and a 2 E and a eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that kind of stuff, really getting that stuff solidified.
So you've got foundation in middle school, foundation going to high school on as many instruments as possible. High school, wow, such a breadth of of years, right? Most of their development at that age is going to be in the high school years because they have more opportunities, more music choices, more advanced music playing. So as a freshman in college, right, we've grown a lot, but yet we still have to have, I need you to be able to try to have these things in place. Brett, what is that, man?
Don't just play marching percussion instruments. That's probably the first thing. It doesn't matter if you want to be in a marching band or if you want to be a music major. Don't just limit yourself to the marching percussion world. Be as diverse as you can. I'll start with timpani because that's where I feel like most of the time I'm most comfortable. If we go back to middle school, one thing I wanted to amend there was I'd like them to be able to recognize pitch. So if the band director plays a note, they can sing that note back. Because typically I see a lot of middle school band directors tuning the timpani for their groups on stage at festivals. If they can hear that pitch, they can put the pitch on the drum. Then when they get to high school, then we start opening up into tuning. So tuning fourths and fifths, tuning thirds and sixths, moving outward to the octave, whatever music that they're playing that might require them to do something where they need a wider interval, and then getting comfortable on more than just 2 drums. Because usually by the time you get to high school literature, you're playing 4 drums. So how do you move around the console of the instrument? Can you use the pedals effectively? Those kind of things. And again, can you play with a good sound? Same thing, sound is good for everything, of course. You don't need to be a 4-mallet player to get into college. In some places, teaching yourself how to play 4 mallets might put you further behind that we would have to go back and start all over again to fix things. So it's not crucial. It is helpful if you're auditioning to become a music major to have some basic 4-mallet literature, but you need to know your major and minor scales. You need to know how to play the instrument properly, and you may need to have some very basic 2-mallet or 3-mallet literature. If you can get to 4 mallets, that's great. I mean, we all use Yellow After the Rain as kind of like the early standard there. And then in terms of snare drum, I was real weak on snare drum when I got to college. I was playing a buzz roll and I felt like that was a great thing. Outside of that, I had some struggles. So I think understanding, your PAS 40 rudiments, knowing what they are and knowing how to play them. Now you get into flams, you get into drags, you get into some extended concepts. We go back to that. There you go. Everybody's favorite rudiment. You go back to what you did in middle school and you just add a little more onto that. And it tends to come in repertoire as well. And then how do you make yourself unique? There's a lot of percussionists in the world. So what is it that that maybe other people don't know? So for example, let's say you played a piece in high school where someone came in and taught you how to play conga. And so you have a conga technique and you know what tumbao is. And so you can go and say, I have this knowledge that, I learned when I was in high school. Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Or I know how to play a djembe properly. Or, Liam T came and worked with my steel band. And so I know how to play this, I know how to play steel tunes. I mean, that is another level on top of it. If you're going to, an out of state school, that's a big program. But for a lot of people, just having a little bit of repertoire in all these places will get you across the line from high school to college. And some of it can even be like all state audition materials. That's a good place to start. And then going up from there. That Macmillan book, it seems like it's just a bunch of 2-mallet etudes, but really it's a lot of great literature. That's a stepping stone to even more great literature. Same thing for what we've got with Peters. That Peters Advanced book is not easy. I have college juniors working in that book right now, and they're struggling with some things. And we're asking high school freshmen to learn Peters Advanced number 4. That's some tough stuff. So if you're at that point, then there's a lot of stuff that you can do in college. So, if you're doing those things, you're crossing from high school to college the right way.
Anybody else want to tackle the transition to college? Joe, you had something?
I really agree with everything that Brett was talking about there. The only other thing I might add is basic grooves on drum set. Whether it's a swing pattern, rock groove, and then also maybe a bossa nova or something simple, a simple Latin groove. Those are some other things I'd be looking at as well coming into college. I want to see them represent themselves on as many of the percussion instruments and areas as possible. And that's what I think that's what we're all looking for in our percussion students coming in to the college level.
I love that, man. Yeah, drum set, groove. Hey, can you give me a swing, right? Give me a waltz. give me a two-step. If you're an exotic Caucasian band down South Louisiana, you've got to be able to do that. And Brett, that's going to probably sustain us sometimes more than being a full marimba percussion.
Oh, absolutely.
Major, right?
I tell people all the time, I've played one marimba gig in my whole life, and I'm not a drum set player, and I've played like 10 drum set gigs. So yeah,
Same here. Same here.
Yeah, marimba's not getting you over that on its own. You know, that Joe's absolutely right. Drum set grooves, man. That's great.
Yeah, man. Great. Brian, you had something?
Yeah, I think everything that was said there, I agree. Joe took my answer there. I was going to say drum set as well. But the only other things I would say as well is for snare drum, making sure that you understand rudimental versus concert if you're coming from high school to college. So, okay, can you play for me a Pratt or a Wilcoxon, or even just like, hey man, can you even play, some of your marching show from high school? Like, that's fine. That's rudimental. That's great. But then can you go and play me some, the Peters All-State stuff, or even just the intermediate Peters stuff? And can you play that well and understand that there's the difference between playing rudimental snare drum and concert snare drum? And then the one clarification, I kind of want to jump on something Brett said. He was like, don't just play marching percussion instruments. To me, there's almost a caveat that we have to say here now, because of the rise of WGI. It's not just that, it's don't just play marimba in your marching band only, or just play snare drum or whatever. We've gotten to this point now where back in the day, yeah, it was, well, I just play marching snare and I play it all the time and that's all I do. But I've seen so many students now that literally they can't play a concert snare drum roll at all because they just play marimba throughout the entire year, from their fall marching band into their WGI line, into DCI in the summer, and then rinse and repeat. And now all of a sudden they've got more chops than all of us combined on marimba, but they can't play a basic concert snare drum roll. So making sure that, again, kind of that diversity is had within the percussion world is going to be essential, I think.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man.
It's kind of interesting. I think what we've all been saying is going from middle school to high school is a lot of technique, but going from high school to college is musicality and style, and understanding that it's more than just, to use Gustavo's term from earlier that he didn't want to say, just hitting things. It's how do you play these things? That's a big step for us. And we'll see that maturity. You walk in the room and audition, and we see you making these decisions, like knowing a Wilcoxon and knowing it's different from Peters. And we see that and go, oh yeah, this person has an idea of what's going on. I bet they're going to make an excellent performer and teacher.
Before we kind of get to some of the more, I guess, rapid fire, quicker answers, there was a question that came down about what role does state MEAs like LMEA play in instruction in schools? Like, so a lot of times in Texas, you'll see a more of a partner approach, that there's so many directors as a part of a school system where there's a lot of floaters, and including that as a percussion teacher. You do see some of that in Louisiana and other areas, and more in hotspots, but really MEAs are really an advisory group, right? We can advise, we can try to advocate and affect policy through communication with LDO, Department of Education, and our BESI boards and things like that. But really, if you want to do something like that, go through the proper channels of, let me go to a music supervisor, let me start to talk to school board members or superintendents. This is really important, that we could have one percussion instructor, right? A teacher who has the foundation and the degree in percussion that could float around between different schools at having a great schedule and doing something like that. So I wanted to make sure that I interject what role an MEA has. And we don't really have a big role, but the role would be more an advisory, is here's the steps that you could take to get that started. And that would be local, more than, say, statewide, even though that would be a dream, right? Is to have this something that could happen statewide. So more rapid fire questions coming through here. If we had to get a novice teacher on, or really could be an experienced teacher as well, to learn things like how to tune timpani, how to change the timpani or snare head, where would they go to do that? Joe?
One thing they can do is just reach out to a local percussion teacher at a university. You can reach out that way, or if you know a percussionist, you have a friend that's a percussionist, reach out to them to ask those questions, especially as a non-percussionist teaching those instruments or wanting to do those things on those instruments.
Brian?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Reach out to your local percussion specialist is going to be the best way to go, especially for something like timpani, which you have a big potential to damage your instrument doing that. It's very specialized. I hesitate to say, like, oh, just go onto YouTube, and I'm like, yeah, you're probably going to do more harm than good trying to do it yourself. So I would say reaching out to a specialist is the way to go. And remember that Gustavo was kind of mentioning, like, this is part of our job. Like, yeah, we're looking at the ideas of recruiting and stuff, but I think I can speak for all of us that we look at this simply as we are here as a resource. Like, we as the percussion specialists at the universities within this look at this as part of our job to be a resource for music educators, whether you're a percussionist or not a percussionist. If you have a problem like this, we'll find a way to get out there and help you to do this.
Brett?
Yeah, I think Brian's absolutely right. I hesitate to tell people to go at timpani on their own. That's pretty specialized. But there is some information out there. The crazy part is if you start looking up snare drum tuning on the internet, you're going to get some wild stuff. Like guys that tune drum set snare drums where 3 or 4 of the lugs are at a completely different tuning system than the rest of the drum. So you have to be careful. But if you're using, a lot of the big manufacturers like Remo, Evans, even stick manufacturers like Innovative Percussion and Vic Firth, they will have products on their website that will show you how you can do some of these things without having to get too far in depth. There was a question that was brought up about measuring timpani heads. And so I just, for the sake of it, just went online and looked, and I found an entire head sizing chart from Remo, where all you got to do is look at this chart and say, I have a 26-inch drum. Okay, well, here's the model of Remo head that fits on my 26-inch drum. And it took literally a minute. So from there, you're great in terms of just getting the resources or getting the hardware. At that point, then you contact us. I've been to 6 schools since I've been here in 5 years to change timpani heads. I have no issue. I'll travel all over the state to change timpani heads because I want to make sure it's done right, because you can damage things. And of course you want students to be playing on great equipment as well. So if you're buying them, yeah, reach out to your percussion specialist. They'll get you fixed up.
This is a big one. Brett, I know that you have done some great work in trying to educate non-percussion teachers on mallet choices. Man, it could be a topic of almost another session, right? I mean, I think the last time we spent on that was an hour clinic on different, how could you wrap that up in a bow and talk about different mallet choices that are available to you?
Sure. So the easy thing is it's important to find the mallets that work for the instrument that is actually manufactured for. So for example, using a marimba mallet on a bass drum in a pinch might work, but it is not going to sound great. And then using outdoor mallets indoors is not always going to sound great. So depending upon what your application is, and especially this time of year, we're all playing outside mostly, we should be looking at mallets that are made for our instruments outdoors. Use a bass drum mallet on the bass drum, use a gong mallet on the gong. In a pinch, you can get away with using a bass drum mallet on the gong, but gong mallets have a different kind of interior than bass drum mallets do. So if you were to swing a gong mallet at a bass drum, there's a good chance you could damage that head. It's heavier. It's a heavier inside of that mallet. So that's a super important thing to think about. Now, where they cross over, things like using marimba mallets on a suspended cymbal, sure, that's fine. We can do that. That's not a problem. Or do I need to buy special mallets for my bells and for my xylophone? No, you can use the same mallets on bells and xylophone if you need to. Budget, obviously, as we talked about in that in-service, is important too. But if you have a basic set of mallets for every instrument that you have, and you can do indoor and outdoor with that set of mallets, then you're going to be fine. And I'm happy to share that whole handout, Brett, if you guys want to put that somewhere that people can kind of take a look at what some of that information is, because I know it's a lot to
absolutely. We'd love to we'll add that as an attachment for sure. Joe, do you have any thing to talk about there with mallet choices?
Well, I agree with everything that Brett's saying in regards to that, making sure you have the right mallet, the proper mallet for the instrument. I think that's number one. As far as that even applies to sticks as well. I'm just going to kind of take it away from mallets, more towards the drums and stuff. Snare drum sticks, don't use your marching snare drum sticks on your concert snare drums. Okay, make sure you have a proper concert snare drum sticks. I see a lot of students that come into lessons or just come and visit and want to play on concert snare drum stuff. We're working on all state materials, but they just have their marching sticks, so just making sure that there's a pair of concert sticks for your concert snare drum playing, that kind of thing. So just making sure the proper sticks for the instrument.
Hey, Brian?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think the difficulty, everything they've said is correct. I think the difficulty that we run into with this is honestly budget. I mean, the reality is there's 8 billion mallets out there, and each one does something ever slightly different, and band directors are like, well, I don't have the budget to do all this. So maybe something that they could think about is, okay, can you budget yourself? Look at what you have, think about what you need, and then budget even for just one new set of mallets every year. I mean, if you do that over time, the reality is a lot of these they're going to last a really, really long time if they're taken care of. I've got xylophone mallets that I bought in undergrad. They're still here. They're still fine. There's nothing wrong with them, and I'll probably have them the rest of my career. It's no problem. So I think that if they think about what they have and then what colors, what textures do they need, just keep a list. And all right, hey, at the end of the year, I'm gonna budget $50, and every year I'm going to buy a new set of xylophone mallets. And now this year, I need another bass drum beater, so I'm going to get that this year. And if you keep doing that, you just commit to it once a year. Within a few years, like, you're going to have a pretty, that's like minimum, like one. Hey, if you've got the budget where you can buy 2 or 3 different mallets a year, man, within a few years, you're going to have a really hefty, mallet inventory that you're going to cover every color that you ever need.
Hey, Gustavo, welcome back, man. We're kind of addressing in a quick fashion, more of a rapid fire is advice on mallet and stick choices for a director.
No, yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened to my phone here. Yeah, I mean, mallets and I think I think they cover most of it, and or all of it. But I think mallets is if the other percussionists in the room and this chat can talk about it. Like, I think I go back to when I got my first set of mallets, when I stopped using my teacher's mallets and sticks, and I started using my own set of like mallets and sticks. That changed so much for me. The concept of sound, like, it's an important thing in the aspect of the student as well. Like, when you first get your own set of mallets and you start to understand, like, they produce a certain sound. When you get a different mallet, it's going to have a different sound as well. So getting your students to understand that having their own mallets is very important. It's something, I think it's something, you can see a huge growth with the student if you do something like that. One thing I like to do, most of my students here at Nichols, they come in and they still have a relationship with their band directors. And for their first few lessons, they have their sticks and mallets that they grabbed from the high school they went to. I'm sure some of you have had that experience with some of your freshmen, and they play with that certain mallet. And I'm like, no, you need to put this away. Next mallet, next lesson, I do not want to see that mallet here again. You need to buy your own set of mallet. Here are 1,000 options. Go in my office, try them all, see what you like the most, and I'll tell you what to buy or not. And like, you can make your own decision what you want to do. But then, and it does make a huge difference for the student as well, like having that that mindset change when they go like, okay, I don't need to wait for the band director to give me a mallet, and like, let me get my own set of mallet. Like, that small gesture can change a whole lot, how much more motivated the student get to like practice and learn the music for your ensembles.
That's great, Gustavo. I did see one teacher who taught in the Lafayette area, who not only had a student buy that bell kit, but also they had to buy a mallet bag and a set of their own sticks and mallets. And the rationale was, if the saxophone player could buy a $2,000 beginning saxophone, then we can ask this from our beginning percussion students, right? And it became, what do we want these young students to buy? And this segues into our final rapid fire question, which is, what advice I'm going to change it on you guys, okay? Because I think you all agree that the advice we want to give to directors who have a background in percussion or don't is to hire a percussion teacher, right, at your school, regardless of what age group they are. Well, we talked about this. I'm going to change it on you. What advice would you give a new or emerging teacher, or experienced really, who can't afford to hire a percussion teacher at their school? Gustavo? Yeah, I threw you for a loop on that one.
Yeah,
What's
invite the
that?
college professors around you, right? Invite
Okay.
the college professors around you. We're more than willing. Like, it's part of our job to recruit. It's an exchange of favors. You know, you need us to come and teach your class, and we need you to let us do that. So if a student like what they see, you know, they can come here and they can come to school here later. Like, it's so interesting. Like, I have, you know, I thought there would be like this territorial, because I'm at Nichols now, and we hadn't had a percussion guy here full time in a long time. And I know the students that go to Northwestern, the percussion students that go to Northwestern, to McNeese, to ULL, all the other schools, they come from this area. And I think it's just, you know, instead of me you know, when I came in, instead of like, oh, we're going to split the students here, I'm like, I see as it more adding to this area. These students are going to get even better now, because they have someone like Troy that constantly comes here right next to my house and teaches at Thibodeau High, you know, and then I go there now as well. And so these students are just gaining more from that. And like I mentioned before, a lot of the band directors just don't know that that's something they can do. Just, you know, contact one of us, contact one of someone teaching a college around you, and like, let them know, hey, I need someone to help my front ensemble. I need someone to help my battery, or during concert season, whatever. We'll be more than happy to do it. It's part of our load. It's part of what we do. And everybody's going to get there with a huge smile.
Well, you're not just teaching the students, right? You're, hopefully the band director is in the room when you're doing it. That way,
Exactly.
you don't have to rely so much on getting the college professor to come. Brian, you want to take this one?
Yeah, just because Gustavo is absolutely right. But when I teach methods, I say, there, you all know a percussionist. Like, you all like came in, you all have classmates that are percussionists. Call them. What, like, they're a resource to you as well. Because guess what? That person that's now a percussionist, but that's a band director, probably still is scared out of their mind to teach their clarinets. And so that's when they're going to call you, the clarinetist, and say, hey, how do I do? So
trade-off.
Don't forget that you have peers out there that have other bits of knowledge as well. So yeah, I get it. Like, you don't have the money to hire a dedicated percussion person to come in. That makes total sense. But guess what? You've got the phone number of at least 2 or 3 people that you went to college with, or you can track them down on Facebook or whatever and say, hey, what can I do for you? I have a favor to ask. I need someone to kind of rewrite some percussion parts because they're just too hard and I don't know what I'm doing or whatever. I don't have the time to do it or what. And how can I repay you? You have peers out there that I'm sure will be more than willing to help you, because they're probably going to have a favor that they need to ask you with your expertise. So that's my thought on that.
Great. Brett, why don't you go next, man?
So there's kind of a backdoor way to do this as well, because both Brian and Gustavo have hit on kind of like the big highlight things. If you're in a situation where you can't afford to hire someone to come every day, you know that probably your, let's say, marching band, your drumline section leader is going to be doing a lot of teaching, whether they know it before the season begins or not. So if you want to kind of backdoor your way into this, just go find a person that person can study with. Maybe you can hire a person to come once a week and work for 30 minutes with that person and just work on general percussion things. And just by being in the room with another teacher, they'll start to learn a little bit more about how to teach and interact with students. I've seen places where the band director will bring in a collegiate musician, doesn't necessarily need to be a freshman, maybe an upperclassman, who will come in once a week and will teach lessons, 30-minute lessons, to as many people who want them as possible. And the student will pay, $5, $10, and the band will pay $5, $10. And so that college student is leaving with maybe a meal, some gas money, and a really cool experience that they can learn from to develop their own teaching abilities. And then those kids are automatically being enriched in terms of what they can offer to their peers. Because let's face it, for a lot of us, we just don't have the cash to pay. We can't. I mean, as a high school band director in this state for a while, I know exactly what that feels like. So it doesn't have to be one of us every week. We could come every once in a while, but if you can get once a week some kind of direct education with someone in your group, you might find that they can just teach some things that you weren't expecting to your line or to your front ensemble, and get you through that period of time where it might be a little bit messy until you can establish your program and establish something that you can work forward from.
Not just a backdoor approach, that's a practical approach for many schools around here, around, right? In the rural areas, right?
Yeah, well, I only say backdoor from the sense that you're not coming straight to us, you're coming to our students, which is in some ways it's even better for us because we've been teaching our students how to do things. So this gives them an opportunity to show what they can do. And it gives us an opportunity to see these things working, because we're all learners, right? Even as educators, we're learners. So
that's great advice, man.
Yeah, it works for all of us, and we get to see it firsthand.
So everybody in the program is a teacher, you know,
Yep.
and there's that student leadership that you know aspect to it as well. Hey, Joe, we'll end with you, man, on this question.
Yeah, well, you know, I agree with what everyone is saying. The other thing I would add, and I think we all probably do this in our percussion methods classes, is have students put together a notebook of things that are important. I give out lots of handouts in regards specifically like timpani, like ordering how to order the right size timpani heads and those types of things. What's typically the issue that's going wrong in those types of things with the drums and whatnot. Just there's lots of handouts and things that we give out and information that's given out in percussion methods. Make sure if you're a young band director that you take good notes and that you're keeping all of those materials. I've seen students make the notebook and then get rid of it right after. Definitely don't do that. Sorry, that's my dog. Definitely don't do that. Keep the notebook and use it. And use it. Go back to it when you can't reach out or when you can't get in touch with one of us or with our students. Sorry about that.
That is, man, that's great timing. That's the alarm to say, all right, guys, we're done. Wrap it up, right? That's the grandfather clock in the background. Wow. Those that are paying attention to this and listening and watching this on replay, how many pages of notes do you have right now? Right? How many times do you need to go back and watch this replay to catch all the little nuggets of information that these guys have given us? This is priceless information. Joe, Brian, Gustavo, Brett. There's so many more things that we can talk about, right? And that could be a definitely project for 2022 is come back and do a percussion part 2 and get into wider variety of topics of maybe non-traditional playing, more of a drum set with what does that look like in an ensemble. So many great things, but setting the foundation for directors to have something that they can go to. And it seems like the best thing to go to is not a website, it's to go to somebody who is an expert in the field. And that's just some great information. You guys are awesome. For everybody out there, we thank you for joining us. Go to our website, lmeamusic.org, to catch this, along with all of our other 12 for 12s. If you want more percussion information, we did have Liam T on in a previous 12 for 12. We also had the most famous percussion player in the world with Dame Evelyn Glennie was also on a call with us before. If you want more percussion, then you can get those as well. So we're going to sign off now. Joe, Brian, Brett, Gustavo, thank you guys so much. Look forward to seeing you live in the future. And to everybody, have a great rest of the year.